All right, so I'm going to show you why there's a better way to do CSS on the web. Because CSS, I mean, everybody kind of knows it. I mean, it's as powerful and as wonderful as it is, it can be really unwieldy. And so a lot of people have started to use utility frameworks like Tailwind. And I have too, right? The thing is, for me, Tailwind actually doesn't go far enough. I want more power and more simplicity. And so that's why I've been working on my own project, and I've been calling it Duomo. So if I search Duomo, it's basically a humble CSS library. And right now, I'm trying to solve two different dimensions of design. That would be stacking and theming. And so I'll explain what both of those are in this quick video. So just to give you some background, Duomo, the idea for the name, one of the first Renaissance men and considered the first modern architect is this guy named Filippo Brunelleschi, who I think in the 1300s, he basically architected the first ever dome structure on top of an Italian cathedral. And that was a big deal because up until that time, even if you had cathedrals, doing a dome architecture was really, it was something that hadn't been done. And so the fact that somebody was able to do it, I mean, it took them 15 years to pull it off. It was a huge and significant accomplishment that is still recognized to this day. So the idea for the name Duomo is simply, if modern websites are complex, and so I kind of think a website is kind of like an Italian cathedral in the sense that they're complex. And so making that process simple is essential to what I'm trying to achieve. All right, so I'm going to show you two things. So I'm going to open, should be this file, and this is going to be in here, Duomo theme proposal. Okay, there we go. So I will show you two things. So the first is stacking. I mentioned that before. So what is stacking? Stacking is basically a Flexbox free way to do layout. Now, what does that mean? It means that you can design one-dimensional layouts, right? So horizontal or vertical, with as very, very little effort. And I just think it's a wonderful way of doing essentially all one-dimensional layout. So you still want to use grid for two-dimensional things if you have that need. But I mean, think about it. Like most designs are actually compositions of one-dimensional layouts. So that's what I'm going to try to demonstrate to you here. So just ignore all the other code. Doesn't really matter. Just for the purpose of this, we're going to look at essentially a blank page. And so this is taking after SwiftUI. SwiftUI, I think, was the first to implement stacks, and then I figured out how do you implement stacks in CSS. And so a stack is essentially a way to organize Flexbox in a way that is very ergonomic to work with. It's very intuitive, it's self-documenting. So let's say I want to put something in the center of the screen. So what I can do is create a horizontal stack. And I'm going to put something right in the middle, put an empty div. Okay, so that's in the middle. Let's say I want to make it vertically in the center as well. Okay, so I need to, there's a few ways to do this. I'm actually going to do this slightly complicated way. I'm going to put this in a vertical stack, and the vertical stack needs to have a height of the screen. Okay, so now we can vertically center, and I can press a shortcut, and this will turn on a visual debugger for me. So the first step to understanding how stacks work is stacks are essentially the most optimized, streamlined API that I can think of to do essentially one-dimensional layouts. So let's go ahead and put a bunch of divs next to each other. Okay, boom. All right, now what if I want to put a space between them because it's a bit crammed? Okay, so I can do that. I can come right here and I can do space, take a pixel value, maybe 16. All right, so you can start to understand, right, with just one or two classes, ignoring the vertical stack, you can do these really, I mean, this is not complicated, but you can see how you can build this up to be something much more complicated. All right, so let's go ahead and say that we want to take these two hello and these two hello and then just shift them to the edges of the screen, right? So we're pushing them away from each other, right? So what we can do is use another class. So we've been introduced to vertical stack and horizontal stack. I'm going to go ahead and add a spacer. What a spacer does is a spacer doesn't care about whether it's a vertical or a horizontal stack. A spacer, it grows to the available area, and this is how we can compose our layouts to essentially we're imitating justify content, right? So it's space between, space around. We can essentially emulate that with fewer classes. And the thing to bear in mind is that our spacer is the space class. This is going to it's going to handle a lot of the sort of the small implementation details. So notice that this blue color, this is just the debugger. Notice how there isn't a gap right here, right? So this represents the margin gap between these two elements, but here there's no gap. And that's actually a specific rule that says if a spacer is empty, don't apply the spacing essentially around it. It's a spacer, right? It doesn't necessarily need its own margin. But I can just put anything inside of this, and you'll see, right, the spacer changes colors. It used to be light blue, now it's a dark blue. And we can see that there's actually a gap around it. And so the point is that just using these three classes, you can really compose layouts really intuitively, right? Because now you're only thinking about, is this a horizontal stack? Is this a vertical stack, right? Where do I put the space, right? So I can just move the spacer. Let's say we put this guy up here, and let's make another one, and we can put it here. So let's just imagine, let's say this right here. Try to imagine what this layout would look like, right? So we have a hello, spacer, hello, spacer, hello. And so you can sort of see how, right, like you can make this arbitrarily complicated. And again, you're not going to use too many classes to achieve a layout. And because we're using utility classes, we can also prefix this with different media queries. So let's say by default, we want a horizontal stack, but when we get to a large pixel width, right, we can swap to maybe a vertical stack. So we have horizontal, vertical, and spacer. So now we've changed the layout based on the screen width, and that's essentially responsive design. And notice how the spacer here is not occupying the full height of the screen. And I'm pretty sure that's because the height needs to exist on this element instead. I'm gonna push this in and push this in. That should give me what I want. Yeah. So right now, so this is a vertical stack instead of a horizontal stack. And there's no reason you can't mix and match these, right? So you could have a horizontal stack instead of a vertical stack. And essentially, this is for me, it's an intuitive, declarative way to do layout. And so an example of a website, well, I've implemented a few sort of example sites so far, maybe 11. So this is YouTube, and this is YouTube implemented using stacks. So just think about it, right? Like this top area, this is a horizontal stack from here to here. So I can just emulate that. Let's go back to this document. Okay, so let's just make that top area real quick. So we know intuitively it's going to be a horizontal stack, and we know we're going to have some buttons inside of it. Let's do like width 32, height 32, rounded full, and let's put a background gray, maybe 200. Okay, let's put a bunch of those, and so now we have our three dots. And remember, we can use a space modifier. And so while I could do this, I actually want to have two sets of these buttons on the left and the right side. So I'm going to just push this over here. I'm going to make a horizontal stack here. And I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to put a spacer right in the middle. All right. And so, right, this is powerful. And I'm going to wrap this with a padding. Do, I don't know, 32. It seems like a lot. Do 24, maybe 16. Okay, so now we're here. If I look back at this website, right? So the point is, this website is really just a composition of horizontal and vertical stacks. And it goes without saying that doing responsive design using this sort of layout scheme, I think it's pretty intuitive. There's one more thing I want to show you. This should be a stack. Ooh, I don't know if I can find this file. Test. Oh, I found it. Okay, so I've implemented sort of a minimum Discord implementation, and again, this is using stacks, right? And it's also responsive. So the point is that stacks they're just like, I just find them a very, very intuitive way of thinking, because you don't need to think about Flexbox. These are stacks are built on top of Flexbox, but what they allow you to achieve is essentially as simple as possible layout. And so if I just open this up, right, essentially everything is a stack, everything is a spacer. Most stacks have their own spacing modifiers. But yeah, I mean, this whole system is very simple and elegant to work with. All right, so I'm going to wrap that up for the first demo, and then I'll record the second demo.